Hello, everybody, and this is Dr. Rebecca Lee McCarthy. So sorry about the technical difficulties. I got a new computer, and things are turning off on me. So I do my settings, and I go in, and then they reset. So I'm going to have to figure out what is up with that. Sorry about that, but here we are again, this time with sound. Wow, one of those mornings. Actually, I woke up in a very bad mood this morning. I must have had bad dreams. And of course, then I was confronted by bad news on all levels. I mean, who isn't now? So, we're going to turn this day around. We're going to make it positive. I am here to talk today a little bit about propaganda. We talked yesterday, for those of you who weren't with us, about the idea that we are actually emotional creatures who can think. And I started my discussion on propaganda there because, dun dun dun, it's important to the idea of propaganda. Propaganda focuses on this ability of humans to really get enmeshed in our personal emotional selves rather than our cognitive selves. And I talked about this yesterday about how we're actually hardwired for this, and it's a form of protection. If we allow our emotions to be heightened, we can better react very quickly, whereas thinking processes take a much longer period of time to get through ideas. So, anyways, for those of you who don't know me and watch me silently blah, 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 blah for 9 minutes on the first attempt of this broadcast, my name is Dr. Rebecca Lee McCarthy. My degrees in sociology, communications, and philosophy. I have a master's degree in liberal studies, and I'm also a professional actress. I like to roller skate. I do some gardening. But mostly what I'm here for is really to help us all, including myself, better align ourselves with the processes of life. How can we as people live a better life? And this is, of course, the aim of all philosophers. Okay, maybe not all, that's pretty absolute. But since the beginning of philosophy, we've looked at what is the good life and how do we live the good life and how can we achieve it and feel it. So, my podcasts are all on that. We focus mostly on communication studies, up to date so far, and that is because I am a communications professor. And right now, we're living in a world where communications are really, really difficult. One of the things that are important to understand about what is interfering with our ability to communicate with each other well and the world is this idea of propaganda. So we talked about propaganda yesterday. We talked about the importance of our emotional selves. And today I'm just going to look at what is propaganda and what techniques does it use in order to get us to buy into something, whether it's an idea or a product or a lifestyle or whatever you have you. A lot of times propaganda is behind this process. So propaganda really is a mix of rationalization and emotion in the effort to blindly persuade. You notice I use the word blindly because the idea is we don't want people to think too rationally, and we certainly don't want people to think about issues or problems from several different points of view. We want to keep them directly in a singular point of view, directly in a singular way of thinking. So I was happy to see that Wikipedia has a fantastic definition of propaganda, which I want to share with you. So propaganda, according to Wikipedia, and I would agree, is communication that is used to primarily influence an audience and to further some type of agenda, which may or may not be objective and may be presenting facts selectively to encourage a particular synthesizing of ideas or perception. I know that's a mouthful. But basically, we are using communication techniques in order to persuade an audience to a very specific way of thinking, doing, buying, acting. And the information we're giving is not always objective. It's usually selective. So I'll take a fact from here and a fact from here, and I'll go, look, here are some facts. It must be true. And then I work to get you to align your perception with the way I want it to be aligned. So the reason this definition is so fantastic is it's generalized. If you go into Webster's dictionary, for example, and you look up propaganda, you'll find that it's really associated with politics. And it's kind of a problem, I think of propaganda as only being associated with politics, because then we miss all the other things in our world that is functioning just to persuade us to do something very specifically and not persuade us to think very much. And again, as we talked yesterday, our brains are hardwired to go to the emotional space. They just are, because it helps protect us. If we immediately feel fear and we see a dinosaur, okay, that's a bad example. We weren't with the dinosaurs. Okay, we see a big cat or a dog who is barking really loud. This fear tells us, get the hell out of there right now. So it's extremely helpful. But there's a difference between biological fight or flight and psychological fight or flight. Now, sometimes they coincide together. When our biological body sees a dog who looks to be vicious, and we have these hormones that go into our body that creates fears and makes us want to act, i.e., get the hell out, right? We often have a secondary thing going on, which is our psychological fight or flight. But they are absolutely connected. We can have many perceived fears that don't actually exist. And that's what propaganda preys on, perceived fears. They aren't necessarily true. They might be true, but they aren't necessarily true. But we utilize, or I'm not saying we because I try to stay as far away from propaganda as I can, but some people might see this program as being propaganda as well. Bottom line is, though, propaganda plays upon the psychological fight or flight kind of reaction that we already have hardwired into our body. And that's why it is emotionally based technique. And it does shun us from being really cognitively present when we're making a decision about our beliefs, what we're going to buy, and so on and so forth. So, broad definition of propaganda is extremely helpful because it allows us to see how propaganda functions in many different aspects of our life. So, with propaganda, what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing manipulative persuasion is basically what we're seeing. So these are techniques specifically used to get us to act or think or function in a very, very specific way. And this is in opposition to communication where mutual meaning is being made, where we're coming to terms and coming to agreement about how we understand different things. So how is this different? It's kind of complicated, I think. I've needled with this for a long, long time. And I really think that when we are in the act of mutual agreement of meaning making, we're not just looking for a one-sided position, a one viewpoint, a one way of action, the right way to do things. We are negotiating our complex selves and trying to find a bridge in which we can function together and work together with our differences. Propaganda only likes differences when it can create divisions. And that's I think is the key of the different types of communication we are talking about. If you're really trying to communicate in a holistic way, differences are okay. It's about understanding those differences and trying to find a way to live with them. Propaganda doesn't allow space for understanding. It doesn't allow space for us to agree to disagree. Propaganda very specifically is, you think this way, and if you don't, you're out. We don't want you here because you're not a right thinker. You're not of the right mind. If you don't buy this product, we don't want anything to do with you. So propaganda functions on division, and true communication functions on a coming together process that is messy, chaotic, difficult, but far more rewarding in the end. Also, propaganda normally has some facts to it. Sometimes the facts are twisted. Sometimes they're placed into different histories. Sometimes we rewrite history and we take a fact from here again and a fact from there, just like little apples, and we pop them in. Um, and the facts are there because they help us go, oh, I know that fact. Okay, I can believe this, right? So we hang on to the facts as being little truths and actualities and objectiveness to allow ourselves to believe the rest of the narrative or the story or whatever we are being told is true. So it's important to have little facts in propaganda because they help substantiate the illusion of truth. And so they are usually existent in propaganda techniques. Next, it plays again on our emotions rather than our logic center, and we have to be kept in an emotional space. So, whenever you see groups that are really promoting propaganda, what you see is they're also really promoting people to be in an emotional state. Usually, it's a negative emotional state because we are wired for what's called the negative bias. Again, we're going back to the fight or flight, both physical and psychological. And if you can keep people in negative spaces and spaces of fear, you have a more high likelihood of being able to control that person through the use of propaganda. Next, again, divisions among people in interests. And this is really, really vital. You have to keep people fighting because if you can keep people fighting and getting into the trenches with each other, then they're not going to have the energy or the time to check out what you're doing. And instead of you having to fight all those groups that are trying to take you down, your followers will fight them for you. So you have less work to do. So creating divisions among people is really super important whenever you have propaganda techniques. And there's almost always a power play involved. Somebody wants to have, take, or maintain their power position. And they use these kind of techniques. And again, I said this in the first attempt where I didn't have sound. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I don't care. It really doesn't matter. This stuff exists outside of any political norms. And you can have the most malevolent person in the world, or they seem malevolent, in a place of power. But if they want to maintain that power and it looks like they can't, propaganda techniques is usually one of the first go-to things somebody will do. If we create divisions among people again, not only will they fight for you and your cause and also keep everybody in confusion, it allows us to dehumanize the other person. It doesn't matter if it's a different race, if it's a different political affiliation, a different religion, somebody who lives in a different geographical situation, all of those things, we dehumanize them so we can continue to pound on them. And that's another really important aspect of propaganda. If we can dehumanize the other, then it doesn't matter what we do to the other because we no longer identify that with them as being somebody who is like ourselves. So that's another technique of propaganda. And with propaganda, messages are usually reinforced within popular entertainment modes, whether you're online, you're on the television, you're listening to a radio broadcast, and so on and so forth. And then it also relies on what we call the confirmation bias. The confirmation bias is really a very simple concept overall. It means that I am trying to confirm what I already know to be true. Confirmation bias does not have any room for differing opinions. It doesn't have any room for communication as mutual meaning making and agreement to not always agree. Confirmation bias says, I believe this, and I'm going to gather and collect all the information I can of all the different people who are out there who also agrees with me, and I'm not going to really look at the other side because I'm comfortable here. Why not have confirmation bias, right? So it works on confirmation bias. It works on our negative bias, again, our hardwired actuality of thinking in a negative point of view or believing the negative. And it promotes opinions over facts. And it also promotes this idea of absolute truth, that there's only one way of thinking, one way of being. So propaganda functions on all levels of our society. And the biggest place we see it is advertisement. Yes, advertisement. I always have a hard time convincing my students that advertisement is a form of propaganda, but it is. You know, I love those Apple commercials, and I'm an Apple person actually, but they use a lot of propaganda in every single one of the commercials. Their original commercial, where you saw this kind of 1984 world and everybody were zombies looking at the IBM machine trying to make us all into these non existent thinking workers. And you have this runner who comes down and they throw this big axe. I don't know if it was an axe or what it was, and it broke the screen. That's propaganda. The commercials of Apple versus PC, separating people out, showing how this one group is better than this one group. This group is funny. They're the Apple people. They're young. They're hip. They know how to get along with other people, other programs, versus IBM, who doesn't get along with anybody and is stuck and is stodgy and reminds you of your dad when you were a teenager. So these are all propaganda techniques. And advertising really does work to separate us out and to make us into groups. I am a Coca-Cola drinker, not a Pepsi drinker. I am a health nut, not a slouchy person playing video games. In truth, we are all a little bit of all of these things. And propaganda just functions to make us believe somehow the choices that we made is so much better than everybody else, and that everybody else is so wrong in their choices that they don't even count in our world. So you need to be aware of propaganda techniques. It happens everywhere. It happens in politics, of course. We saw it over both conventions, right? Both the Democratic and the Republican convention, lots of propaganda. We see it in our spiritual practices. My religion is better than your religion. We see it in our social practices when we divide people among race. We see it in things having to do with our sexuality, the color of our skin, our gender, you name it. There's propaganda techniques. And every day you get into your car and you're living somewhere outside of Hawaii, because Hawaii has outlawed this, you are exposed to one major sign on the roads after another, and they're all propaganda. So why does it work so well? Yes, we're bombarded with it. We are bombarded with these different techniques, but it works so well because propaganda rewires our brains. And if there's this great study from 2016, I want to make sure I get the title right. It was published in the Journal of Nature Neuroscience, and it's called The Brain Adapts to Dishonesty. Neil Garrett, Stephanie Laarzo, Dan Early, and Taylor Short. And these scientists discovered that the more we lie, the more our neurons in our brain accepts the lies. We are malleable people. We are so malleable. We are clay. We are clay. And it is very, very easy to reshape us into the images that are desired. I think they had this great phrase in the article I read that said, neurons that fire together, wire together. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So when we are not the observers of our life as well being inside of our own life, and living our own life, if we avoid becoming also the observer so that we can, to the best part of our ability, objectively see how we might be manipulated in life, then we're going to get in trouble. We're going to become the zombies. The zombie apocalypse is going to happen, and it's not going to be about eating brains. It's going to be about eating ideas and not thinking about those ideas. So it's important to understand that propaganda wires us. We start to think that being sold to 24/7 is a good idea because we become rewired by the advertisements we are exposed to. We start to think our political choice of opponent is the best and everybody else is crap, and their followers are crap, and we dehumanize those people because our brains become rewired to think that way. But the good news is this: you don't have to be that. You really don't. We can make other choices. We have in us the ability, we are our own artist. We can take the clay that is our brain and reform it if we so choose, to love, to light, to gratitude, to deciding to help people, deciding not to participate in certain things. You can turn your TV set off, stop watching at least 30% of those commercials that literally is melting your brain. And you can make positive choices about how you wish to live, how you wish to observe yourself in your own life, and then slowly but surely unhook from the whole system, which is trying to control us. And you could say that this podcast is propaganda, and you would be right to some degree. I am trying to convince you that there is another way, that you can decide not to just become the zombie of your own life, that you can literally decide to make conscious decisions about your health, about how you think, about how you love, about how you function. And it's up to you. The only difference between me and maybe other systems of propaganda is I'm looking at you and I'm going, it's really up to you. You have to make the decision. It's within you. All of us have to make that decision. Do we want to be led, or do we want to make active choices in our life? And that's why I love meditation so much. Meditation teaches us to be the observer in our own lives. It teaches us how we can step back from this illusion, if you will, of having other people control us, and to learn how to control our own thoughts, our own emotions, and our own choices. We can do that. It's amazing. So if we have the capacity to be wired towards the negative, we can rewire ourselves. So let's have a little meditation and do a little bit of rewiring. Please get comfortable. Again, Kevin MacLeod, I said I'd find different music, and I will. I just haven't found any that I like yet. So thank you, Kevin, and Elf Meditation. Take a seat. Get comfortable. If you're driving or using heavy equipment, you might not want to participate strongly in this moment, but you can always come back to it when you're ready, or find a different meditation. Focus on your breath. When we become the observers of our life, we give ourselves the ability, an active ability, to make our own decisions. So as you focus on your breath, I want you to imagine one of those times in your lives where you allowed some type of propaganda, whether it was an ad for an item you saw online, it was from a politician, a family member, a friend. Imagine one of those times where you didn't observe, but you just went along. What happened? How did your emotions play a role? Now, I want you to think about a similar moment in your life where you were able to step back and observe what was going on, and you weren't so invested in your emotions that you were able to see the workings of that moment, and you gave yourself space to make a critical and vital distinction. Can you see it? Can you see the difference between the two within yourself? Because as much as we're the same, we are also very different. Now, please let go of those 2 moments of your life and just sit in being. Just be. Focus on your breath. If a thought comes in, just put it on a cloud and wipe it away. It'll be there after you are done. For the moment, it's enough just to focus on your breath. Breathe in for a count of 5. Hold for a count of 1 or 2. And then exhale for a count of 6 or 7. You're not trying to achieve anything right now except control of your breath, observation of your breath. This energy called life, prana, that's it. Observe the breath. I thank you all for being here today. I apologize for more tech issues. We'll figure it out. All will be well. As you go throughout your day, try to be conscious of the decisions you're making and why you're making them, and incorporate the positive rather than this nebula of negative many of us are living in right now. do it for yourself. Mahalo and namaste.